It's the thing people will not stop talking about, and our buddies over at ESPN have said this is going to be a real challenge for Georgia. We've talked about this a lot. A season ago it was going to be, can they replace Stetson Bennett, Matt DeBerry? Year before that it was, can they win? Can they repeat? Can they keep their brain on to repeat as national champions? They turned out to do that. In 2021 is, can they break the curse? Eventually they did do all of those things. For Georgia coming into 2024, the thing that, and we've talked about this a lot, the biggest challenge is going to be the road games, very specifically at Texas, at Ole Miss, at Alabama. That's what ESPN says is going to be the real challenge for the Dogs. I don't necessarily disagree. Are we overdoing this, or is this about right?
I think it's about right. It's not a road game, but I do think it's important and probably good for Georgia that they start off the year against Clemson. They're not just getting their feet wet, they're jumping in the pool to start the season. And Clemson's defense is going to test Georgia. I think Clemson's offensive line is going to get crushed. I think Cade Klubnik is going to lead that game with a lot of bruises. But their defense, I do think, is legit, and they're going to test Georgia that game one, right? And we saw last year Georgia had a couple cupcakes to start the game. First big game of the season, South Carolina comes to town, and they get off to a pretty sluggish start. I don't know if they were losing at the half or it was tied, but
At South
it was kind of,
Carolina?
yeah.
Oh, yeah, they were
I mean,
losing. Yeah.
yeah, it wasn't great. So I do think it's probably best that they start the season against a strong opponent in Clemson, and test them early. And I do think that will help them as they go to Tuscaloosa soon after, as they go to Lexington. They're not, again, dipping in the water. They got a big one to start the season. I think that's going to help them down the road, Ryan.
Hey, Ryan, don't you think they sort of sleptwalk through the beginning of 23? At least go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot they had to deal with at the beginning of that. New quarterback, new/old coordinator,
Yes.
gelling all that together. Really emotional 2 years with Stetson and all that. I think it's funny that you said they looked to replace Stetson a year before that. Fans were screaming for him to leave. But
welcome to college football.
We might be slightly overestimating the schedule. Like you said, just right, too much, not enough.
I think it might be slightly.
They thumped Ole Miss last year, and there's not that much that's different between these two rosters. Ole Miss loses their best offensive player. I know that they had a really good one from South Carolina. You get one of the best transfer portal players in that defensive lineman. So they did things to make themselves better. But there was, I mean, after the first quarter, that was a 3-quarter just absolute blowout between Georgia and Ole Miss. So I know it's different when you're in Oxford. It won't be in Athens. Maybe they are a little bit better than they were last season. But just knowing where Georgia's at, there's a reason why they still have the best odds to win the national championship. They still have the best odds to do this and that. It's because people think they're that much better than these other teams. And so we keep clumping Ole Miss in there, and they're going to end up being a top 10 team and fighting for that. But when it came to that game against Georgia, it wasn't close.
No, it wasn't close. I mean, I didn't think, and this turned out to be accurate. I didn't think Ole Miss could stop Georgia, and I think that's the hope by getting Warren. I think it's Warren Nolan. I can't remember. Nolan is
Walter Nolan.
Who is it?
Walter Nolan.
Walter. Excuse me, not Warren. That will help Ole Miss. I would imagine that will help them, Matt. But one player, I mean, he might be hurt in that game. I mean, who knows? So I think for the Rebels, there's two. We know Alabama is always going to be and has been very good for a long time. That's just all there is to it. We saw what Ole Miss did to Penn State and how their season was, generally speaking, this past season. Texas went to the college football playoff. But for me, the one that has still the most winning DNA is Bama. I don't think Texas was a one-hit wonder, but that discussion is not crazy because they have not consistently been good. Sark has not been consistently good. In terms of Lane, as it relates to Ole Miss, I don't know his best win because it's not against Georgia or Bama, okay? And, he's a lot of talk, and that's great. And by the way, he is one of, if not the best offensive minds in the business. But they don't win when they need to, / they get scored a lot of points on when they're dealing with really powerful teams. So I don't know if it will be difficult. And as Ryan can speak to, Matt, you never know when Missouri is going to be very difficult. They don't play Missouri. You don't know who on this schedule is going to be tough. It looks like the road games are going to be the hardest thing, but what if Tennessee's really good all of a sudden?
Yeah, and I do think Tennessee is going to be good. And like you said, every once in a while, Auburn will make Georgia earn it. South Carolina will make Georgia earn it. And Ole Miss did add other pieces on that defensive line. They added Prince something from Florida with the long last name. They added Juice Wells, South Carolina's best receiver. So on paper, they look very, very good. They're going to have to do it. But I think Lane Kiffin's a very good coach. And I think beating Penn State, I mean, we knew Penn State were frauds, but that was still a solid, convincing win to a very good season. They're beating the teams that they need to now, but now they have to take that next step and beat the elite teams. They're going to have a chance to do that, especially with Georgia coming to town. I don't think they are top to bottom as talented and as deep as Georgia is, but they did add some good pieces, and Jackson Dart is a good quarterback, and that is going to be a test. I don't think Georgia's going to walk in there and crush them the way they crushed them in Athens. But, Georgia's going to have to be ready. I think overall, this is going to be a really this could be Kirby's biggest test to get his guys ready to play at an elite high level every single week, because
they're not going to.
I'm assuming they're going to get everyone's best. They're going to have to be ready.
They're not going to be able to do that, I don't think, Ryan.
Yeah, no, I just think that when you look in the microscope, and the schedule on paper obviously is what it is, and I'm not refuting that. It's arguably the toughest one. I think Florida's, just because of who they are, is the toughest. But you look at this in Georgia, there's no way that there are 5 schools that have a harder season than Georgia has to deal with. But you can easily look week to week and point out the flaws and point out how, this is more than what you're looking at. With Alabama, we still don't know what they are without Nick Saban. Yeah. We don't. It could be way worse. It could be roughly the same. Their best defensive player left. So there's things that you point to Alabama, and it's just, you say, I just don't know that they're going to be quite as good. Is Texas going to be as good? They reloaded a little bit from what they lost, but I don't know that they reloaded on defense as well as they did on offense, unless there's just guys in the transfer portal I just don't know a lot about. So I think you can look through and pinpoint and say, hey, maybe some of these teams aren't quite as good as.
Do you trust Ryan, Kirby's? I mean, is Georgia the most trustworthy program right now in college football?
Yeah, 100%.
That's I don't think problem for everybody else.
That's no hesitation to answer.
That's a problem for everybody else, wouldn't you say, Matt?
Absolutely, because they're consistent, and they, even when they lose, they barely lost to South Carolina. But you can't even talk about that game anymore because Jake Fromm's not playing terrible, and Tyler Simmons isn't out there dropping passes. I mean, it's a completely different team. I mean, it is what it is. They are better up and down the entire roster than they were in 2019 and 2020. Now, if you want to beat Georgia, you have to play probably your best game. And I think Alabama probably played their best game when they beat Georgia. There's no doubt about it. And Missouri played their best game when they almost beat Georgia at home. I thought Ohio State, they couldn't have played much better than they did when they lost to Georgia, So, when you play the Dogs, if you want to win and upset the Dogs, because that's what it would be an upset, you have to play your best and more. And that's very tough to do against a well-coached team with a really good quarterback and elite offensive line, and what we can always say is a very consistently very good defense year in and year out. They might take a step back from their standards, but Georgia's defense will be one of the best in college football year after year after year, as long as Kirby Smart and Glenn Schumann are there.
Well, and I don't, they're playing Clemson. These are the games not in Athens. They play Clemson, Kentucky, Alabama, Texas, Florida, and Ole Miss. Those 6 games are all not in Athens. I don't know if those are their 6 toughest games, but they're a lot more difficult than Tennessee Tech, Mississippi State, UMass, and probably Georgia Tech. I will leave the Tennessee and Auburn for another time, but I just, they're not, this is not wrong. It's so hard to see the future, y'all, that, this is a very challenging road schedule. There's just no doubt about it. And I think identifying it that way is completely correct. All right, thanks for watching Dog Post. We'll see you on the next video.